First of all, thank you everybody for sharing my Siyum. I could never have imagined 7.5 years ago that we'd be sharing with hundreds of people. This is an amazing accomplishment for Michelle mostly, but it's an incredible joy for me. And thanks for the lovely intro, Michelle. This day crept up on me unwittingly. Daf Yomi has become such a daily habit that at first I didn't make a big deal about finishing the cycle. And then all of you, my friends, my family, my Daf Yomi friends, you all got so excited for me that I realized maybe this is really a big deal. So thank you. I wanted to say that the Siyum is in memory of my father, Martin Greenwald. Though he couldn't have known, I have been doing Daf Yomi thanks to him. My father, whose yortzeit was actually on Chol HaMoed Pesach a few weeks ago, and actually also today, April 11th, was a pharmacist in Milford, Pennsylvania for many years. We lived there full time until I was 12, and we were almost the only Jews. And then he and my mother made great sacrifices that we could move our family to a more Jewish community. They chose Teaneck, New Jersey, and became very active in Jewish institutions as soon as they arrived. Jewish life and education were paramount to my parents, and it's a lesson I've carried with me since. My father retired after an illness in middle age, and it gave him more time to do the things he wanted to do. He loved nature, Shabbat, and his family more than anything. He died too young, but from him I've learned courage in ways that are impossible to describe. I would like to also dedicate this Siyum in memory of another person who was important in many of our lives, the former rabbi of Beit Knesset Ohel Ari in Ra'anana, a founder of Beit Hillel, Rav Ronen Neubert, who passed away suddenly over Pesach at the age of 50. We are all still in shock, reeling from this terrible loss. Rav Ronen was more than a Rav to us. He was also a very good friend. He officiated at the weddings of our children. He attended their army ceremonies, their tekkasim. We worked together on shul projects. He and Penina became close friends, and it is almost impossible to believe that he isn't in our world now. We wish much comfort to his family. Michelle, in addition to my dad, it is thanks to my wonderful friend Michelle, Rabbanit Michelle Farber, that I am here. In 2013, I was at the end of the year of saying Kaddish for my father. Though not many women were saying Kaddish in our shul at that time, I found the fellowship of the daily minyan and Ra'anana very comforting. I was concerned about how I'd feel afterwards. For a variety of reasons, Michelle suggested I join their women's Daf Yomi group, which she levered every morning in her house, as she just told you. It was amazing. We showed up every morning in her very clean house. Though I'd never formally studied Talmud, it intrigued me and I joined. And so we met day in and day out in person for years until we moved to Jerusalem in late 2019. And then Corona was kind enough to bring Michelle back to my living room care of Zoom. I jumped in at the beginning of Masechet Tractate Yoma, the 5th book in the traditional Daf Yomi cycle. Knowing not a word of Aramaic, but indebted to my translated Art Scroll edition, I was immediately captivated. The Talmud made Jewish history come alive. It filled in the blanks in a very human way. The Holy Temple was suddenly demystified. Real people with real names worked there. They negotiated their salaries. The high priest, the Kohen Gadol, even had a potential substitute wife. What was I getting into? There were secret passages, hidden places. Who knew? I was sold. I was in. In the ensuing years, I dipped my feet in the water and began to swim. I did not become a Talmud scholar, but I've grown to love the study of Talmud. It is our collective Jewish heritage and is now an inseparable part of my life. I am proof that lo bashamayim hi, the Talmud is accessible to all of us, anyone. For those of you who are just beginning to study or are considering, or even those who want to just dabble now and then, the Talmud is a rich world of ideas, an entire world. Amid the details, step aside and hear the fabric of the words, the larger concepts. We are eavesdropping on the discussions of generations, from the most mundane to the most profound. As a whole, it's a sweeping, magical ride. Please forgive any errors I might make. I was asked what impressions struck me most over the past 7.5 years. So here are a few, and I invite you to come along with me. To start, Masechet Yoma. It's called Yoma because it's preparation for the big day, Yom Kippur in the temple. Dealing with human behavior is a primary topic of HaShas. The Talmud is honest. The high priests, the Kohanim in the temple were mostly la creme de la creme, but a few were corrupt. A lottery system had to be established to fairly distribute roles. It isn't whitewashed, the Talmud, which I appreciated. It is very human. On the other hand, the efforts of the Kohen Gadol on behalf of his nation on Yom Kippur were incredible. So much rested on one man. So many people worked to prepare him. The evolution of Yom Kippur is far more holy and complex than I knew, and the study of Yoma changed and enriched my personal experience of Yom Kippur. Next Masechet is Masechet Sukkah. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I have to bring this one up because I happen to be an architect. And I thought that I would love the details of Masechet Sukkah because nobody loves boring details more than an architect. So many measurements, amot, who knows? And do you know how small the smallest possible sukkah can be? Wait. But it was the stories and the discussions in this Masechet that fascinated me most. Do any of you know that an elephant can be the wall of a sukkah? You will learn that. Did they even have elephants in ancient Israel or in Bavel, in Babylonia? I never researched this, but it seemed that rabbis were asking this for a deeper reason. Perhaps they were being provocative. Why were they asking this question like this? Became a favorite question of mine. There are often layers to a Gemara discussion, like peeling an onion. I could see how one can spend a year analyzing the complexities. Daf Yomi whets the appetite for more. Morality. If you don't have a lulav on Sukkot, can you steal one? They ask that. Does a positive commandment override a negative commandment? What is morality? Obviously, not to follow commandments blindly. And then there's the fun story of Rabbi Akiva's flimsy sukkah on a ship. Next, Masechet Rosh Hashanah, the advanced science and math in ancient times is fascinating. You can practically get a degree in physics and astronomy by studying this tractate. They used the heavens as GPS and the sun and moon as Google Calendar. I had no idea that these concepts were hidden in the Talmud. A version of the Pythagorean theorem was used to calculate angles. Was this Greek influence or was it discovered independently? Another great thing to research. Going along, Masechet Ta'anit, fasting. This was one of my favorites. It's full of gems. You realize how modern and yet how ancient we still are by learning about how critical rain was in the survival of all people. Rain was the life force. Societies collectively fasted if rain didn't come, sometimes for days. Today, we can desalinate and can move water from place to place easily. We are still at the mercy of nature, even now. Witness the modern devastation of hurricanes, earthquakes, and yes, corona. Then there is the famous story of Choni HaMa'agel, Choni the circle drawer. Look it up on page 19. He even has his own Wikipedia page and a tomb you can visit in the Galil. Here is a man who bargained with God on his own terms to bring rain. And then he got rain, and then he was rewarded by being excommunicated because of his tone, how he spoke to God. Fascinating discussion ensues that sounds eerily familiar to today's times. Masechet Megillah. As you can see, the Talmud is loosely marching through the year. Rain comes, then winter, and then Purim arrives. We can read Megillah to a congregation. Who can read Megillah? If no men were available, then children, deaf mutes, and even women. Imagine a group of smart women sitting around a table learning about what we were not allowed to learn about. It was wonderful to be in a group of women for this. There's a lot more on this. Masechtot Moed Katan and Chagiga. These Masechtot are all about the intermediate days of the holidays, Chol HaMoed, and what is permitted, and then it segues suddenly into the laws of mourning. There's no separate tractate for many subjects that you'd think should be in the canon. Death and mourning, big topics, but it's all over the place and it's partly here. In case any of you are worrying about how to keep up, it can be challenging, happens to all of us. These Masechtot came in and out in the months before we had the wedding of one of our children. This was a whirlwind time for me and I had a hard time keeping up with the daf. I missed many days. Technology to the rescue. I am a swimmer and I bought underwater headphones and I downloaded the daf on podcasts. Ever the multitasker, I was able to make up the daf while doing laps between splashing. I used to laugh, thinking I may have been the only woman in the world who was doing Daf Yomi underwater at the time. Thanks to Michelle and the explosive growth of women learning Talmud, I bet that women are now doing Daf everywhere. The next 6 books are known as the Order of Women. I was looking forward to this. What did a bunch of ancient men have to say about women? In fact, it's not even clear why each of these 6 topics are included in a section about women. Nazir, zealots, nidarim, oaths. What did these topics have to do with women? The connections are actually very interesting, not at all what I expected, and it was certainly fun to be in a women's study group for this. Masechet Yevamot, this is one of the more challenging, complex tractates. How does one teach the complex concept of yibum, the Torah requirement of a brother to marry his brother's childless widow? A man dies, but does his name have to die with him? Yibum ensures continuity of a name, but it also had practical applications regarding inheritance and tribes keeping control over land. Even more interesting, perhaps to us, was the explanation of the chalitza process, in which a woman may refuse the marriage if she does a very odd ceremony with a shoe. There are many examples of the powerlessness of women depicted in the Talmud, but this is not one of them. Yibum is still practiced in modern-day Israel in some Sephardic families. We read about one case in the newspaper as we were learning about it. It's very rare, but it happens. And if you like IQ-like logic problems, this is the book for you. Keeping track of the complex family relationships was very challenging. I don't know if Michelle remembers, but she used her children's dolls as learning tools. Anyone coming into our class at that time might have wondered what we were doing. Masechet Ketubot, Gitin, and Kedushin. They all deal with marriage, the rights or lack of rights of women. Age of consent, shocking, but it was a different time. Sex, divorce, drama, lots of drama. My takeaway from these sections was how far we have come as modern women. We are not there yet, witness the problem of agunot, but we are light years away from the lives of women a few thousand years ago. Masechtot Nedarim and Nazir, zealots and oaths. The power of the word in Judaism is fascinating. The taking of oaths and extremism were strongly discouraged by the sages. This illustrated the power of the spoken word in Judaism more than anything. You say something, you better think about it first. Be prepared to stick to your word, because breaking vows was considered a very serious offense. The Torah allows one to take on the yoke of extremism, to be a Nazir, to forsake haircuts, great products, and to avoid contamination with the dead. One would think that religious leaders would love this, encourage a higher religious level, like monk could. But I was struck by how the opposite seems to be true. Like oaths, extremism is strongly discouraged. The rabbis seem to be saying that this was allowed, but excessive. One could reach high spiritual heights through regular practices and equality. I love what that says about Judaism. Another great lesson for modern times as we grow increasingly polarized. Damages, the babas, Baba Metzia, Baba Batra. This is the next section. These sections are known collectively as nizikim, damages. Some of the most well-known tractates of the Talmud are in this section, dealing with civil laws, torts, theft, punishment, boundaries, responsibility, witnesses, testimony, judicial processes, how humans must live together in a civil society. So many of these laws no longer seem revolutionary to us, but they must have been very revolutionary at the time. Sanhedrin was one of my favorite tractates, full of topics that I delved into more deeply on weekends, such as the formation of a Jewish legal system, the characteristics of a true leader, and finally, capital punishment. These sections are not dry legal tomes, don't worry. They challenge us morally to think throughout about the victim as much as the perpetrator. They are also peppered with agadata, Talmudic moralistic stories, as well as legends about famous biblical personalities. They're really amazing. Kedoshim, this next section, several tractates, is all about the sacrifices in the temple. Truthfully, who would not find this daunting at the outset? Who is not saying secretly to themselves, if ever there was a time to quit Daf Yomi, maybe this is it? Do I really need to learn this? What possible relevance could this have to my life? Very nice that we ended the Masechet with this, and that Michelle actually touched on this at the last page. And yet, like all of the Talmud until now, I didn't know what awaited me, and wow, was I surprised. It is never what you think it will be. First, the sages were doing something very noble. They were trying to preserve and record what they conceived were the practices of the temple before they could be forgotten. The second temple had been destroyed about 200 years before the earliest Talmudic voices heard. The sages relied on testimony and expanded on what they knew of sacrificial practices. Learning this section, one can feel the importance of their mission. It's nice to be part of it. In addition, the details of the sacrifices were actually interesting. The process was demystified, made real, who did what and when. More interesting were why and with what intent, also touched on tonight. Intent plays a big role in sacrifices. In a practice that seems on the surface to be so action-oriented, thought is critical. If the Kohen charged with sacrificing your animal is distracted and didn't have the proper intent, your sacrifice might not count. After the destruction of the temple, sacrifices were replaced by personal prayer, and a person no longer had to outsource his God connection to a third party, the Kohen. For a time, though, this was Judaism. This is how it was practiced, and it's important and interesting to know how it worked. On a side note, these tractates are not for the faint-hearted. Plenty of blood and gore. Chulin is a veritable butcher's manual, and by the end, a few of us were sworn vegetarians. We were also amateur veterinarians, knowing the anatomical system of all kosher animals, as well as the various wingspans of grasshoppers. There was a certain amount of pride when we finished these challenging tractates. Kudos to Michelle for extraordinary teaching. Nita wrapped up the traditional cycle, we, a group of women, learning about men's views of menstruation. A complex tractate, though. Many of you have been here for the start of the new Daf Yomi cycle since January 2020. Brachot, kol hakavod to you. Brachot, Shabbat, Eruvin, Pesachim, and Shekalim. And it's delightful to see the blossoming of our small Daf Yomi group into something large and worldwide. Tips for those looking to last the long haul. The Daf Yomi system is brilliant because each day starts anew. It is a taste that allows you to dig deeper in your own time, if you wish, or quite honestly, pass quickly if a certain page doesn't pique your interest. It is worth sticking with the Daf cycle, even if a certain tractate title seems uninteresting or too complex. I found the Talmud to be the ultimate example of ADD editing. A paragraph that could confuse a builder or a butcher, let alone an amateur like me, suddenly segues into the most fascinating story about Queen Shlomtzion HaMalka or a charging ethical debate. See this as a 7.5-year course, which will pass very quickly, I can tell you, in which the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The sweeping breadth of knowledge that you will gain is invaluable. I am looking forward to starting again. You are also part of a huge community. I was once sitting on an airplane when I realized that my seatmate, as unlike me as one could be, had his Talmud open to the same page as me. Fellow Daf Yomi studiers, we proceeded to discuss the Daf as if we were old friends. Life has happened in these 7.5 years, good, healthy life for which I'm enormously grateful. The Daf has been my constant friend each day, accompanying me through thick and thin. I wake up to the sun, to a new day, a new Daf, always moving forward. And in ending Kaddish, I embarked on a new beginning. Continuing Jewish learning has allowed me to keep the souls of both of my parents alive in me. It is indeed a celebration. Thank you.
Wow. Amazing. I think that was a huge inspiration to all of us, Shari. Thank you for sharing your journey with us. And we're very appreciative that you chose to celebrate together with all of us.